Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Today, we're going to be talking about the Connected College. I'm joined today by a friend of the show, his second appearance, Elliot Felix. Welcome back to Trending in Ed.
Great to be here, Mike.
And I know you've been working on a book for some time now, and the book is dropping like it's hot, July 22nd, available through Amazon and wherever you get your books. It's called The Connected College. We're going to talk about that, how to be more agile, connected, busting silos in higher ed is what the conversation is going to be about, because that's what the book is about. But before we do that, it's been a couple years now since you were on Trending in Ed. You were on to talk about how to get the most out of college, which is a connected topic. But before we get into the new book and what you're doing now, can you quickly catch folks up on who you are and how you got here?
Sure. Well, student success is my mission. So I try and deliver on that in lots of different ways. During the day, I lead higher ed strategy consulting projects, and having worked with 120 or so colleges and universities on improving their student experience by transforming the spaces that students learn and live in, the services that support them, the technology systems they use. I learned a few things and I wanted to share those with students and families. And so how to get the most out of college is a kind of a handbook for students and families on how students succeed and what they can do in college. And so in addition to consulting and helping students and families, I thought, it'd also be good to share things with folks that work in higher ed so they can help their students succeed by working better together. And so that's really what I'm up to, is creating an encouraging evidence-based playbook for breaking down silos so that students succeed.
And your background's interesting. You talked about spaces too. There's an architecture and user experience design kind of theme throughout those interactions, which is something that is still really cutting edge, I think, in a lot of the thinking for higher ed. And then, the name of the book is The Connected College, but can you paint a picture, maybe the converse of that, what are some of the problems in higher ed that the book's designed to help people break through on?
Yeah. I think our last conversation was very much about the role that design thinking can play in student success. And that's certainly a thread in the Connected College, as it's a useful mindset, skill set, tool set for folks to make these connections and bridge some of these gaps and solve some of the problems. The book talks about 5 connections you're trying to help folks make. And you could equally think about those as, the disconnections or the problems you're trying to solve. One is a sense of belonging, right? Only 65% of students feel like they belong at their institution. And that's like the lens that you're going to see your whole experience through.
Yeah.
Another is that courses don't often connect to careers, and not that, everything doesn't have to be on a vocational track. I'm not advocating for throwing out the liberal arts. What I am saying is when students can connect what they're doing in the classroom to some kind of career path, it's incredibly motivating. It may even be the way they find that belonging. And it's when they're learning durable skills, they're learning how to understand people, how to communicate, how to collaborate. These are the things that are in demand now into the future. And I think, the other kinds of disconnection is that we have, unfortunately, at many colleges and universities, we have siloed structures that separate people. And so you have lots of different folks doing similar or related things. Maybe it's strategy, maybe it's structure, has created this environment where it actually adds cost and complexity to the student experience. I open the book talking about a consulting project I did for a university where they had a writing lab and a writing center, basically two services doing the same thing, but for a number of reasons, history, tradition, structure, whatever it might be, they're not really working together. So I'm imagining a future where colleges and universities are better connected because students feel a connection to the institution, their coursework connects to careers, colleges are collaborating internally and with corporate partners, because I think that's another key part of this. If you are going to do breakthrough research, if you are going to have inspiring experiential learning, you can't just be connected internally, you have to be connected to companies and community groups as well.
Yeah. And there's a lot of detail in the book, a lot of case studies and a bunch of interviews. I will share with my audience that I was one of the interviews that helped with your book. But can you talk about how you pulled the book together, the kinds of conversations you had along the way?
Yeah. And I enjoyed our interview. It was kind of fun. Like, I don't know if it's quite the other side of the mic, but turning the tables on Mike Palmer.
Yeah.
And I just realized Mike and Mike, I never made that connection.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
In any case, my favorite part of writing a book is interviewing people because, you get to learn from all their work and all their insights and all their experience. So the book has references it's about 700 different sources and 150 different institutions. And if you're wondering, I added it up the other day for my newsletter. It
Mm.
turns out University of Michigan is the most cited institution. I don't know if that's scale or awesomeness or both,
Yeah.
but
Go Wolverines. Yeah.
yes, and I'm sorry for all the Buckeyes out there. You were certainly mentioned, but maybe not as much as Michigan. So what I tried to do was really think about who has a role to play in student success, and turns out that's everybody. So if you imagine the org chart of a college or university, each of those boxes on the org chart is a chapter.
Mhm.
And so there's academic affairs, there's senior administration, there's athletics, there's student affairs, there's advancement, career development, IT, facilities, libraries, student support, board governance. And so each chapter really speaks to that function. And it starts with a profile of an innovator who's leading a connected college. Could be a VP of student affairs. It could be a dean. It could be a provost. It could be a president. It could be a CIO. Could be a VP of advancement. And so you hear their story, and then there's three big ideas. And then there's a bunch of tactics on how to work together internally and externally, right? Across departments and with companies and community groups. So that's kind of the structure. And I had lots of, dozens of great conversations in each of those areas. So it's really putting together the insights and the ideas from those innovators, plus my own experience working with 120 colleges and universities, and then my own research.
Yeah. And for folks who are interested, folks in higher ed, I want to get into student success maybe next because it's a term people drop a lot. And I don't know if
Like it's hot. Yeah.
they drop it like it's hot, like this book. Folks may mean different things. And I kind of want to get a little more into that. But for our listeners, if you're into higher ed, in addition to the book, which is available now, there's also the Connected College newsletter. And now it's all come together really in the book. So I did want to get to student success next because it does feel almost like buzzword bingo sometimes, where people say
Yeah.
student success, they feel like they're checking a box and they're kind of not really clear, I guess, on what they mean. And it was striking to me as I've been, following your work that it does mean different things to different folks. How do you think about student success?
It's a great question. It's either the Achilles heel of the book, although I don't know that books have heels, but it's either the Achilles heel or a brilliant bit of strategy that in the book, I don't define student success per se, because I'm not sure there is one definition. And in all the conversations I had for the book and now in my podcast, that's one of the questions I asked folks is, how do you define student success? And some people talk about it in terms of metrics, right? Retention rate, graduation rate, career placement rate. Some people talk about it in terms of student engagement and belonging. Some people say it's really defined from the perspective of the student, what they define as successful. So if you have a third year who's in computer science, who elects to leave after their last co-op and they don't finish their degree because they got their dream job, that to them is probably success. If you're looking at it strictly from a metrics point of view, that's one more stop out. So I think student success is a little bit in the eye of the beholder. But I do think there's enough common ground where if we feel like students find their people, so they have that sense of belonging, they find their path, so they know where it's headed, they find their place, and then they find some kind of sense of purpose that connects all those things. So they're on their way to a life that's rewarding, that's meaningful, that's impactful for them, for their family, for society. I think that's maybe the common ground. And, there's different metrics, there's different approaches to get there. It's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, and there's some complexity and open-endedness to it, which is a lot of like the evolved thinking on a lot of these things is like, if it were just complicated, if it was just like get from point A to point B, it wouldn't be an area of focus for so many people. But since it is complicated and it is changing, to your point, the metrics used to be about admission, then they evolved into retention. And now, to your point, they're evolving further to look at things like career placement.
Yeah, post-graduation outcomes are key.
Yeah. So, it's almost like rather than a single metric, it's almost like a mindset, and that's where I think it does circle back to your previous point about, design thinking and thinking about your end user and allowing for some co-design to really even extend to the student and the family themselves.
I think the design thinking or human-centered design, whatever you want to call it, yes, it might involve some Post-its and whiteboards and people with complicated shoes, but I think it's more than that. And I think it's that way of thinking where you're really focusing on people and trying to understand their needs, their experiences, and then you're trying to create ideas together, across constituencies with your corporate partners. Let's say you're trying to design an experiential learning program or you're reimagining your gen ed curriculum. You want to be doing that with students. You want to be doing that with the companies that are recruiting your students, with the executives that are coming back for continuing ed or executive ed. And so you're focusing on people, you're co-creating with them, and then you're trying things out, prototyping, you're learning along the way. Some things are going to work, other things very much are not. You're going to face plant every so often, but you're going to have to pick yourself off the sidewalk and learn from it and do something different or better the next time. So I'm biased because design to me is such a powerful way of seeing the world, and it's such a way of making it better that it's kind of hard to not see its value.
Yeah.
But I try and make it be valuable for the reader as a tool.
Yeah. The structure of both of your books are very user-centered. Folks can really focus on their area, go directly to the chapter that's relevant to them, which is
Yeah,
great.
it's a little choose your own adventure style.
Yeah, but the other aspect of it that I think is important is that there is more of a holistic sensibility to it as well, where I think of higher ed as a lot of complex legacy organizations. It's the myth of the blind man and the elephant, where everybody understands their part in tremendous detail, but they don't understand the whole. I know that is something that you very much integrate into your approach. What are your thoughts on silo busting? How do you do it? What should people in higher ed, what should be top of mind for them if pretty much everyone I know in higher ed gets frustrated by the silo effects? What are some thoughts on how you can break through there?
It's a great question. And I think silos are endemic to many organizations, especially ones that are designed for durability, like higher ed.
The nice thing about silos is they keep consultants employed.
Yes, I suppose they keep everybody employed.
It's true.
It's a battle worth fighting. There's a couple of reasons. One is so many universities are just bad at strategy. Every university has a strategic plan. I mean, they have to for accreditation.
Yeah.
But very few universities have an actual strategy, in the Roger Martin sense of things, where they're thinking about where to play and how to win and what would have to be true for their strategy to be the right one. And so strategic planning, that's big tent. Let me create a big enough tent where everything we do fits underneath it. And then I don't have to make any hard choices about what we're not going to do. Anodyne statements about entrepreneurship and excellence, they really don't help the organization focus. And that lack of focus begets more siloed structures and more redundancy. It also inhibits collaboration, right? Because if you're still in the be all things to all people camp, how do you collaborate with the college down the street or across the state if you're competing for the same students? If you're doing something that's unique, that's different, then other folks can complement you. Maybe you can share courses, joint degree programs. Maybe you can share back office, whatever it might be. So I think strategy is a key part of it. I think structure is a key thing to look at. And I think typically what happens in higher ed is legacy structures just get new functions bolted onto them.
Yep.
My classic example is the library. If you look at most library org charts, they follow the kind of selection, purchasing, cataloging, circulation of books. And then they have new thing, they deal as many libraries, especially research libraries, deal as much with data as they do with physical books.
Yeah.
That gets bolted onto the side. They help people with creative projects. They help with communication. They help with that data visualization as well as the management. Those things get bolted onto the side instead of stepping back and integrating it. I think once you have the strategy and the structure, then it comes down to lots of different tactics. For instance, sharing data, creating a shared picture of your students and who they are is a great way to do some silo busting, because it doesn't do you any good for the dining folks to have one survey, the athletics and rec to have another one, course evaluation sitting over here, student engagement data sitting over here.
Right.
So I think like bringing the data together can often be a great way to create that common ground. The book has lots of other tactics. And by the way, it also has a shout out to a book I really love, which is in 100% tactics for silo busting, called Hack Your Bureaucracy, which has 50 or so tips on kind of working within large, slow moving bureaucratic structures.
Yeah. Wow. And I do appreciate your book recommendations. I still remember, and I did several episodes about the extended mind, which was something
Oh yeah.
that I picked up.
Paul.
I learned it by listening to you and following what you're putting out there in the world, Elliot. So definitely a good thing there. One thing that comes to mind, Dario Amodi from Anthropic recently was sort of ruffling some feathers and putting some interesting ideas out there about artificial intelligence and its impact to organizational structures. And higher ed leaders are certainly thinking about AI, even if they are like ostriches with their heads in the sand. Did you know that when an ostrich has her head in the sand, she's tending to her nest? She's not ignoring the relevant stuff out
I
there,
didn't know that.
taking care of business. That all being said, AI is the 600-pound gorilla in the room. It's very zoologically themed conversation.
Yeah.
But it is something that everyone is confronting, certainly at a leadership level. And then if you are in a functional area, a lot of organizations are now saying, before you hire that human, explain to me why this can't be done by AI. How is that impacting higher ed? What are your thoughts on how AI can, should, or shouldn't factor in the design thinking?
Well, one of the chapters in the book that isn't corresponding to a function on the org chart is the breakthrough ideas chapter, because I thought there are some things that are cross-cutting.
Mm-hmm.
They're ideas so big, they're everybody's job to deliver on them. And that includes industry partnerships and experiential learning that I've mentioned, as well as organizational change management. Because if you do want to change the strategy and the structure and the tactics of how you work together better, how you coordinate, how you collaborate, how you consolidate, you need change management to make it happen. Like having the good idea isn't enough. You need to have good implementation.
Yeah.
But the last big idea in there is all about embracing generative AI. And I think it's something that people have been slow to embrace, but it's really critical because it helps you automate a lot of the routine processes and administrative functions. And I think higher ed has kind of been in the continuous expansion mode, because, it's a little bit like getting a mortgage in Miami. Like if real estate value keeps going up, you don't have to worry so much about the price or the monthly payment, and your balloon payment is down the road.
Yeah.
We're no longer in that era where there's an endless supply of students and you can recruit regionally. So I think folks really have to look at how to meet the moment by being more cost effective. And part of that is looking for more efficient ways to operate, to deliver services, to do all these things. And I think AI can be a huge part of that. I also think back to the course to career connection that we started with,
Hmm.
I think universities have a responsibility to train students in the tools that employers expect them to be fluent in.
Yep.
Um, and of course, tools come and go. There'll be a new flavor of AI every week, every month, every year. The pace of innovation is amazing. So you can't attach entirely to that in the same way that you can't, put all your hopes and dreams in a Salesforce certificate.
Hmm.
You still have to have great people skills and great data analytics and great communication skills. But I do think those durable skills need to be coupled with technical skills on the tools of the trade. And I also think that the last key reason to embrace AI is it is a great reason to work together, because there is no reason that 4,000 colleges and universities need to go it alone,
Right.
right? If you're trying to develop your AI policy, if you're trying to develop your curriculum, this is where the kind of collaborative spirit of higher ed can really make 1+1 = 11, because you can work with your peers on some of these policies and programs and processes and save everybody time and save everybody money and learn in a cohort and maybe reduce some of the risk and accelerate some of the adoption.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of, I had Eddie Watson from AAUP on the podcast a while back because he has a book out called Teaching with AI. And, those central governing bodies are the ones that are trying to grapple with this in higher ed and then provide tools and services in terms of how to stay current, how to think about the reimagining of things. Folks who are in higher ed are now being forced to reimagine and kind of open up
Yeah.
their thinking where, many of them folks I know, my wife's in higher ed. Part of the benefit there historically has been it's like a known commodity. I get good at what I'm doing and I just kind of tune that model. And now we're looking at, genuine disruption to the point where the type of work you're doing today, I think very few people think they'll be doing the exact same type of work in 5 years, in 10
Right.
years, even further down the line. What about the political climate? Because that's the other element of the disruption that's out there where, we went through the pandemic, thought we were going to be able to come out and catch our collective breaths. But instead, now we have new tools emerging like generative AI, and then a new kind of political landscape that we're living within, which is certainly, conversations about higher ed in the political realm have shifted in the past years with the new administration. How are you talking to folks about those kinds of ideas?
It's funny, a decade or so ago, when you would have a presidential debate, people would talk about budget cuts and they would think about, do we need an axe or do we need a scalpel? That was the debate. We now have a chainsaw,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the metaphor.
Hmm.
So I think that's created a massive amount of uncertainty around programs that are focused on equity and programs that are focused on research, because recovery of indirect research costs, which by the way is a terrible way of talking about them, are overhead. Overhead sounds like something you want to cut, but
Right.
when you're talking about facilities and the people that support them, they're not extra, they're not
Yeah.
waste. They're foundational. Like, pretty tough to do research at a bench if that bench isn't in a building that has like floors and walls and ceilings and columns. If you can do that, great.
Yeah.
If you find
Suddenly I'm thinking about VR, but I don't think that's the direction you were going there.
yeah, I mean, well, I think there's lots of computational research, that can happen anywhere. But I
Yeah.
think if you want to cure cancer, you're certainly going to be doing some computational biology, and you're going to be doing in silico research, but you're also going to be doing in vitro and in vivo
Yeah.
research.
Right.
And so I think we're operating in an environment of uncertainty where agility, scenario planning, collaboration, all these things are kind of evergreen practices that we just have to adopt even faster and even more wholeheartedly. Not only are we operating in a time of uncertainty, I think we're operating in an era where flat is the new up. We're out of this continuous expansion mode, right? We don't have 20 million students, we have 16 million.
Yeah.
And so I think the way that institutions meet the moment and the challenges were always before us. Maybe they're now just kind of foregrounded, or in the same way the pandemic kind of accelerated things. I think we've seen an acceleration. And now is the time to better coordinate, better collaborate, better consolidate. I talk to people all the time who see these kind of redundancies. I talked to somebody the other day and she's like, in our building, we have the faculty engagement center on one floor, and then we have the faculty development center on the next floor.
Yeah.
That really feels like two related functions. So I think, it may not be as stark or obvious as a writing center and a writing lab, or a faculty engagement and faculty development.
Yeah.
But I think every campus could benefit from stepping back and seeing where are there ways to consolidate, where are there ways to centralize, not just as a cost-cutting measure, but as a student experience enhancement, as a student success enhancement, because now students aren't getting the runaround. Now our curriculum is more integrated. Now we're collaborating with corporate partners and community groups. And so I think collaboration, coordination, consolidation, I think that's how we meet the moment, because
Right.
flat is the new up.
Yeah, flat is the new up, and there's risk of down, there's risk of closures. It reminds me of The Godfather. It's time for your wartime consigliere, and I feel like you're like a friendly wartime consigliere is the way I think about it. A lot of your framing tends to be hopeful and positive about the future, but also clear-eyed when looking at the realities of what's out there around you. There's genuine existential risks. There's been talk of the demographic cliff for years, and now it's 2025. This was the
Yeah,
year
here
that
we are.
it was forecasted. How do you think about that? I've been struck listening to your podcast. There's a lot of hope and a lot of like inspiration, I think, that comes from the conversations that you're having. How do you stay positive, and how do you sort of engage with that frame when you're interviewing people?
I'm glad you said that. I think I got a Kirkus review on how to get the most out of college, my first book, and it called it encouraging. And that was maybe the most flattering compliment I could receive, because I really was trying to be encouraging. And I'm thinking of the Connected College as an encouraging, evidence-based playbook for breaking down silos so that students succeed. And I am trying to bring that hopeful ethos and mindset, because I think about higher education the way Winston Churchill thought about democracy, right? It's like, it's the worst system there is except for all the others.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many amazing things that are happening at every college and university, right? Where students are finding inspiration, they're connecting with professors, professors are doing breakthrough research,
Mhm.
they're creating remarkable places, they're partnering with companies. So students are doing real world projects that make an impact and build skills. And I think we can do this. I really think we can meet the moment. I think it's going to take some bold decision making. I think there's often not a shortage of ideas. There's a shortage of courage and consensus. And I'm hopeful about the future, because I see so many great things happening, and I think we could build on that. We
Mhm.
will have to do some things differently. And you hate to see a consolidation, lead to fewer people employed. I mean, the last thing you want is people losing their jobs. But there's probably more right now. The higher ed sector, the supply exceeds demand.
Mhm.
So there's going to have to be some kind of reckoning.
Yeah.
Right sizing is not a great term, but I do think right now most colleges and universities are sized for when we had 20 million students, and now we don't. Maybe we could.
Right.
I mean, the percentage of high school grads that went to college 10 years ago was 70%. And I think now we're down to 62.
Yep.
So for as much talk as we have about having 15% fewer 18-year-olds with the demographic cliff, we're losing almost as many students who were born and exist but are not opting into college. So I think that's also part of how we turn things around,
Mhm.
is we really have to demonstrate and deliver the value. We have to reach adult learners, of which there are 40 million plus with some college and no degree.
Right.
And so many people are looking for a way to move up or move over. And I think there's lots of ways we can help. We have the, I go back to Ghostbusters, right? We have the tools, we have the talent. We just have to make it happen.
Nice. Just don't cross the streams. I don't know. Maybe even
Yeah.
it's time to cross the
Yeah.
streams.
Or maybe cross them. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the
Depends
day,
on what moment we're in.
spoiler alert there for those of you who haven't seen Ghostbusters, there may actually be some crossing the streams that happens in there. But it does make me wonder about where this stuff is heading. And your point, I think, is a good one in that the visionary folks right now are addressing the unmet needs rather than trying to claw back business that's actually gone to some extent. Either the demographics or the nature of work is changing. I keep coming back to the gaps in the workforce, AI and other emerging technology requiring us all to unlearn and relearn things that we may have learned earlier in our lives. How are some of the more visionary, forward thinking universities, your MIT bona fides, what are some of the cutting edge universities doing in terms of future design, future proofing, thinking about where higher ed is heading?
Well, at the peril of answering two questions at once, you're talking about what are the forward thinking people doing? And then also, how do we meet this political moment? And I
Yeah.
think if there is a bright side to where we're at, I think it's that where higher ed can play a direct role in economic development and workforce development, I think those projects are moving forward.
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued when I see university industry partnerships that are driving that agenda. I got to work on a project with Carnegie Mellon, a robotics innovation center. If you imagine a large high bay loft space, you might have a Carnegie Mellon team, you might have a corporate partner team, and then you might have a blended team working on everything from, a self-driving tractor to a robot that can clean a high rise so that, people don't have to.
I've been holding out for robot butlers for 9 years on this show. They're still not here, but they're getting close.
Yeah. Rocky
Right.
Rocky 4,
3 or
4,
4,
I
I forget.
3 or 4 has an early prototype that certainly, Pauly benefited from both service and I think companionship.
Yeah.
I think about things like that, or, Rowan University is expanding their campus, focusing on health and wellness and advanced manufacturing. We worked on a innovation district for the University of Minnesota focused on life sciences. So I think the folks that are really working with industry are maybe the ones where I'm the most excited. And that could be on research. It could be on entrepreneurship. It could be on experiential learning. I was just talking to Imperial College London. Their enterprise lab program is, absolutely crushing it, connecting students with industry and internships and everything in between. There's so many great examples, like University of South Florida, putting entrepreneurship in the strategic plan and then measuring who participates in it. There is, Northwood and Maryville University doubling down on esports. There is Hollins University doubling down on adult learners. There is Alverno College on competency-based education. Everybody hears the stories of Georgia State driving student success with data. There's Arizona State reinventing student employment so that the Work Plus Learn program is really giving students a chance to meaningfully contribute and to prototype future career paths. There's Virginia Commonwealth University reimagining how they approach STEM with things like office hours in the commons instead of a faculty room, where they're reaching, I think 30% of the students that go to office hours never went before because they flipped the script on that. I think, referencing 150 plus case studies is really my favorite part of, well, I guess I already said interviewing people is my favorite part. So I'll say my second favorite part, having learned from all these folks, is spotlighting all their successes so that others can learn as well.
Yeah. And maybe that's your reader's favorite part, might be one of their favorite parts. It's tough. We love all our children equally, but one of my favorite parts of what you're putting out there is the specific examples. It reminds me of the William Gibson quote, the future is here now. It's just not very evenly distributed. It's all over the place. And the problem, I think, frequently is that there's not that connective tissue, to get back to the title of your book, where the information doesn't flow laterally within a university and then it doesn't necessarily circulate enough across. And that's something where I do think folks like yourself who've worked with over 100, I heard over 120 now. So congrats on that.
Yeah, we're up to 120.
But like that's where you see connections by virtue of the nature of your role. The other name drop in terms of history, I did want to drop Thomas Malthus out there, Malthusian prognostications from back in the day. He was the contrary to Darwin and others, but basically saying we're gonna run out of resources, everyone's gonna starve. And what we found, at least thus far, is that technology, human ingenuity, our use of technology has allowed us to stay ahead of the curve, which is why it just might be one of those crisis moments where, Ethan Mollick talks about, being the human in the loop, like
Right.
there's an opportunity for the courage you talked about, but people actually have to lean into the challenge. They have to run towards the fire, not away from it. Do you have some closing thoughts? I feel like we're trying to provide some direction, some hope for folks. The name of the book is The Connected College. It's out July 22nd. Elliot Felix, it's got a newsletter. We'll include links in the show notes. But if you want to bring it home for especially folks who might be in higher ed, what are some concluding thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'll end the podcast the same way I end the book, which is two things. One is the book ends with a kind of a worksheet that folks can use to get started, to think through. It's called the Program Design Canvas, because I think programs are sort of the unit of, what colleges and universities offer, whether it's a mentoring program, an orientation program, a degree program.
Yeah.
And it's a tool for folks to think holistically about the purpose, the people, the program, the platforms, the places, the policies, and kind of get on the same page. So it is a free tool, downloadable tool that folks can use to do some of that collaborating and connecting. And finally, the way I end the book, what might be a bit of unconventional advice, but the OSS, the precursor to the CIA,
Yeah.
80 years ago, they wrote something called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. And there's lots of ways to sabotage an organization from the outside in and the inside out. You can cut their power, but you can also disrupt their progress.
Yeah.
And it has all these tips like argue over minutia, make all your groups big, never less than 5, reopen matters that have been closed and decisions that have already been made. And I think, in terms of tactical advice for working better together and breaking down the silos, if people can flip the script on that and they can think about, if leaders can think about their job isn't to stop things to manage risk, it's to green light whatever they can, however small, to make progress. If they can make small, nimble, agile teams and really think about their governance structure and be intentional about who's included and when and how and why, if they can move forward and think about the big picture as opposed to getting lost in the details, I think we can do it. I really think we can meet the moment. I think there's so many great examples out there that I try and spotlight in the book. There's so many great people. There's tactics that we know work. And I think all folks need is the playbook to make it happen. And I'm hopefully I've provided that.
Amazing. Who doesn't love a good canvas? Actually, like it is
Yeah.
something, when you were talking about that, it did make me think about building more of that type of framework into K-12, into higher ed, the working on something and focusing on yourself so that we all can get better collectively. Very much the sentiment in Elliot's book. The name of the book is The Connected College: Leadership Strategies for Student Success. Elliot Felix is his name. Check him out. We'll be hearing from this guy, and I don't mean a postcard. Elliot, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thanks, Mike. Nice work behind the mic.
And for our listeners, subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Ed.